You were never supposed to hear this story. What happened in Brooklyn, 1863, was erased, not forgotten, not misplaced, erased by hands that understood the danger of what these people experienced. They thought they could feed them, photograph them, then file their humanity away under refugee assistance. But the moment those 23 souls took their first bites of those hamburgers, something ancient cracked open, a wound in the illusion, because what they tasted wasn't just food, it was recognition. The body remembered what freedom felt like. And that's something the system cannot allow. The German volunteers thought it was kindness. A warm roll, a patty, a bit of salt. But the air shifted when the tears started. Every sob that night carried centuries of silence. Every mouthful of beef became communion, a rebellion of the senses. The enslaved had been starved not only of nourishment, but of dignity. That night, both returned at once, and the shock of being treated as human was too much for flesh long trained to obey. But here's the part you were never meant to know. Within 2 days, the first was gone. Within 2 months, all 23 vanished. No graves, no records, no explanations. Brooklyn police claimed they'd moved on. The army shrugged. Newspapers mentioned nothing. The files that did exist were sealed, mislabeled, and eventually destroyed in a warehouse fire that no one investigated. Convenient, isn't it? If you've ever wondered why moments of awakening in history are always followed by silence, why truth burns bright and then disappears without trace, it's because the system that governs this world isn't built to allow liberation. It's built to feed off the friction between hope and despair. Every empire, every economy, every church, every state, each feeds the same engine. Human energy harvested through control. The hamburgers were never just hamburgers. They were a ritual interruption, a break in the program. When those 23 people cried, something in the code of this reality broke, and the ones who monitor the code noticed. Tonight, as you listen, you'll feel it too. That uneasy tightening in your chest isn't fear, it's recognition. You already know what's coming next. The same pattern, the same silence. The same manipulation dressed as mercy, because in 1863, the taste of freedom became a threat, and threats to the system are always made to disappear. History will tell you they vanished, but history never tells you who made them vanish. It writes absences as if they're accidents, lost to time, drifted away, unaccounted for. But every disappearance leaves fingerprints, if you know where to look. And in the archives that survived, hidden between ledgers and grain inventories, a name repeats, Virgil Dutton. A boarding house owner near 5 Points, Manhattan. No one ever questioned how a simple innkeeper could afford property in a city half in flames from draft riots. No one asked why his ledgers included deliveries timed with the disappearances from the Brooklyn refugee camp. Dutton was no innkeeper. He was a broker. Flesh was his currency. He didn't capture people with chains. He captured them with paperwork. Legal documents stamped and sealed by the same government that had just declared them free. Freedom, it turns out, was negotiable. For the right price, any black man, woman, or child could be returned to an owner who might not even exist. The bounty system was an invisible hand, a quiet business transaction between northern respectability and southern profit. And those who cried over hamburgers? They were too visible, too human. A public reminder that emancipation wasn't freedom. It was an illusion of mercy controlled by those who profited from both sides. The deeper truth, the one that burned with their tears, is this. Every system of power must maintain control over perception. You can break the body, you can even free it. But if you don't free the mind, the body will still serve. Dutton and men like him understood this principle. They weren't just traders in flesh. They were guardians of the lie, that the enslaved could be freed by law rather than by awakening. And you, listening now, are caught in the same architecture. Different tools, same mechanism. Today it's not chains, it's screens, it's contracts. It's the illusion of choice polished until you forget it's a cage. They learned to perfect the system of invisible control that began with people like Dutton, one that feeds on belief itself. The missing 23 were erased because they saw through it, if only for a moment. They tasted food seasoned with care, and that simple act revealed how deeply they had been starved, not of meat, but of meaning. Once you recognize the cage, you stop being useful to those who built it, and those who stop being useful are never allowed to stay visible. Before you go further down this story, take a breath. Because what comes next isn't about ghosts or conspiracies. It's about patterns. The same patterns that shape you now. The ones your ancestors felt in their bones long before you were born. Every age has its version of a refugee camp, a controlled environment disguised as safety. In 1863, it was a rope factory turned shelter. Today, it's your digital feed, your comfort zone, your routine. Both are built from the same architecture, containment that feels like protection. The Brooklyn camp was meant to recondition the formerly enslaved for life in the free North. The volunteers believed they were civilizing, teaching, saving, but what they were really doing was installing a new operating system. Every lesson, every prayer, every rule whispered the same message. You are free, but stay in line. The human soul is never broken all at once. It's trained to confuse permission with freedom. That's why those 23 cried. Their tears weren't weakness. They were a signal, the body recognizing that something sacred had been stolen long ago. For a fleeting moment, they tasted wholeness. And the system cannot tolerate wholeness, because control isn't maintained through brutality, it's maintained through comfort. The camp gave them food, shelter, and the illusion of safety, just as modern systems give you convenience, entertainment, and the illusion of control. Every structure of power must teach dependency while calling it gratitude. That's how you bind a population without chains. When the first of them disappeared, no one questioned it. The logic of control had already done its work. Don't make trouble. Be grateful. Obey. Fear is most effective when it looks like order. The other refugees learned quickly. Don't ask questions. Don't stand out. Don't mourn too loudly. Silence became survival. That silence is the real machinery of oppression. Its gears greased with good intentions. Its rhythm disguised as peace. It hums beneath every era, whispering the same lullaby. You are safe as long as you don't think too deeply, but thinking deeply is exactly how you wake up. This story isn't about 1863 anymore. It's about you right now, hearing words that history tried to bury. Once you see the design, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize the pattern, you become dangerous. When people vanish, the living invent explanations to calm themselves. In 1863, they said the missing had gone home, found work, or moved on. But Patience, the woman who led the Georgia group, saw through that lie. She'd lived too long inside systems that called control care. She recognized the rhythm of disappearance, the way fear was used to prune curiosity. Every empire depends on selective blindness. It teaches witnesses to question their own senses before they question authority. Each new vanishing tightened the noose around the survivors' minds. Volunteers prayed harder. The army sent inspectors who saw nothing amiss. The newspapers printed sermons about divine tests and moral duty. It was all noise, carefully tuned to drown out the one unbearable question: who benefits from their silence? Because silence is currency. Silence is compliance. And in every generation, someone is paid to keep it circulating. By September, Patience had stopped sleeping. She wrote on scraps of paper in a language no one around her could read. Symbols, sigils, patterns that looked less like words and more like maps. Maybe she was remembering something ancient, something older than the plantations, older than the ships. Every oppressed people preserves knowledge in code. When language becomes dangerous, symbols become survival. Friedrich, the young German butcher, found one of those scraps under her bunk after she vanished. He said it was warm to the touch, as if the ink still lived. It was later confiscated by a military officer who ordered all notes destroyed. That officer would later die in a house fire that burned without smoke. Coincidence, they said. But those who touched the paper claimed it made them dream of rivers flowing backward and children born with closed mouths. The hidden lesson? Nothing disappears. Energy doesn't vanish, it transforms. The missing 23 didn't simply die. They were absorbed into the machinery that had enslaved them, their memory feeding a myth designed to keep others afraid of waking up. And here's the truth that chills the blood. Those mechanisms didn't end with slavery. They evolved. The plantation became the prison. The whip became debt. The overseer became policy. The brand became identity. You are living inside the refined version of that same structure, a quieter, cleaner system of obedience. Friedrich couldn't let it go. The disappearances, the burned records, the way every witness recited the same line as if rehearsed, they must have moved on. It gnawed at him. He began to visit the docks at night, asking questions in broken English, bribing ferrymen, following wagons that never returned. What he uncovered wasn't a crime, it was an industry. Behind every missing person there was a transaction. Names moved like inventory across ledgers, stamped with federal seals. The paper trail ended not in the South, but in northern factories, contracts linking shipping companies, insurance offices, and a handful of benevolent societies. That was the revelation. Slavery had never ended. It had been rebranded as progress. Every age launders its evil through paperwork. The chains are simply hidden in contracts, in debt, in the language of law. The body doesn't need to be owned if the mind has been trained to obey. Friedrich saw it, though he couldn't name it. The same men funding abolitionist schools were investing in the industries replacing slave labor with wage slavery. The North congratulated itself on moral victory while building systems that ensured the same control, just without the guilt. That's the pattern you were never meant to notice. When a system upgrades, the cruelty becomes abstract, more efficient. You don't whip a man. You make him compete until he collapses and calls it ambition. You don't cage a people. You sell them the illusion of freedom and call it civilization. This is the secret architecture of power, control refined until it looks like choice. Patience had felt it too. Before she vanished, she told Friedrich something he would never forget. They want the body quiet and the spirit blind, she said. But when the body remembers, the spirit wakes. He didn't understand then. He does now. You do too. Because this isn't just history, it's the template. You live inside its upgraded version, and here's where the descent turns inward. If you've made it this far, you've already felt the pull. You've seen through the veneer. Now I want you to prove it, to lock it in. Comment the phrase the body remembers twice below. Do it not for me, but to mark your transformation, to signal that you see the machinery for what it is. The system feeds on silence, break it. Speak the code, because once the body remembers, the mind can no longer serve. Friedrich's journals stop abruptly on October 31st, 1863, the night the last of the Georgia refugees vanished. But one final entry survived, hidden between invoices in his uncle's butcher ledger. It reads, "They came from the water." No noise, no struggle, only light beneath the bay. At first glance, it sounds like madness. But in the weeks before that night, multiple witnesses along Wallabout Bay reported something uncanny. Pulses of light rising through the fog, as if the harbor itself were breathing. No one investigated. The Navy dismissed it as chemical reaction from waste runoff. Yet decades later, divers mapping the harbor floor found fragments of iron shackles fused into stone, as if melted from within. What if the disappearances weren't abduction at all? What if they were transformation, people pulled into the deeper current of history's hidden machinery? The energy of trauma doesn't die. It circulates. It becomes infrastructure. Every time human suffering goes unacknowledged, it turns into architecture, buildings, systems, nations. The Bay swallowed those 23 souls not to erase them, but to integrate them into the structure of control itself. That's the forbidden principle. Power feeds on what it destroys. The suffering of the enslaved became the engine of the empire that replaced them. You can trace the energy forward, from the plantation to the factory, from the factory to the bank, from the bank to the algorithm tracking your every impulse. Each stage more polite, more technological, but feeding on the same vibration, submission. And yet, there's another current, the current that woke in Patience's tears. It's the rebellion of awareness, the moment the enslaved heart recognizes itself as infinite. Systems of control cannot extinguish that. They can only bury it under noise. Every generation rediscovers it and pays the price. Friedrich's light under the water wasn't supernatural. It was symbolic. The body of the oppressed, illuminating the machinery of their oppressor. The moment when pain becomes knowledge, when knowledge becomes resistance. That light still flickers beneath every institution built on silence, beneath every law that pretends to protect while it confines, beneath every comfort designed to keep you still. Listen closely. You can hear it even now, humming beneath the static of modern life. The same vibration that once rose from Brooklyn Bay, waiting for someone awake enough to recognize its frequency. By the time investigators finally arrived, months too late, the refugee camp was empty. Not abandoned, drained. The air was said to carry a strange metallic taste, the walls damp with something that wasn't water. Volunteers refused to stay past sundown. The official report blamed disease and migration, a bureaucratic phrase that buried what really happened, the absorption of living beings into a system that thrives on their disappearance. Because that's what power does. It consumes and repurposes. Flesh becomes labor. Labor becomes currency. Currency becomes silence. What they stumbled upon in 1863 wasn't an isolated horror. It was the blueprint. Every empire learns to turn its atrocities into infrastructure. The slave trade became shipping networks. The auction block became Wall Street. The plantation records became census data and property deeds. The same paper trails that documented bondage became the backbone of modern capitalism. That's not metaphor. It's genealogy. And this is where it gets darker. The system didn't just inherit the wealth of slavery, it inherited its psychology. The reflex to dominate, to extract, to rationalize cruelty as commerce. It learned how to harvest belief, to turn hope into leverage, to weaponize morality itself. Once a man's conscience is managed, his obedience becomes self-sustaining. That's the secret the 23 stumbled into. Their tears weren't just emotion. They were signal interference, an unprogrammed reaction inside a controlled environment. The system corrected itself by erasing them. When you study patterns of disappearance, from plantations to prisons to digital platforms, you find the same logic repeating: isolate, dehumanize, rebrand, profit. It's efficient, elegant, almost mathematical, and most people never see it because they're rewarded for not looking. Comfort is the currency of blindness. But here's where you, listening now, have to decide what kind of man you are. The kind who drifts through history, repeating its hypnosis, or the kind who looks directly into the machinery that built his world. The truth is corrosive. It dissolves the illusions that make you safe. That's why so few seek it. If you can still hear me, you've already started to awaken. You're not the audience anymore, you're the inheritor. The torch passed from those who cried over hamburgers to you. Their story didn't end in 1863. It's been whispering through every system you trust. And now it's asking one question: will you keep the silence or break the pattern? If we strip away the superstition and the myth, what remains is a pattern of human behavior that repeats whenever fear and power intertwine. The refugee camp, the factories that replaced it, the offices and networks that followed, all of them rely on the same trick, convincing people that obedience is safety. That's the psychological core of every control system. The machinery itself is invisible. It lives inside expectation, inside habit. What happened to those people in Brooklyn is documented only through rumor. One worker claimed the camp's overseer received orders from higher authorities to close the site and relocate the refugees. Another spoke of wagons covered in canvas leaving before dawn. No one ever proved abduction or murder. But every witness described the same feeling when they stood in that empty yard, a stillness so dense it felt like the ground was holding its breath. That's what happens when history hides something. It doesn't vanish. It compresses. The North congratulated itself for ending slavery while quietly building industries that depended on its ghosts. Insurance companies that once insured human lives now insure corporations. The same signatures appear across centuries, moving from ledgers to databases. That's how power sustains itself. It mutates faster than outrage. And each generation tells itself it's different while following the same script. If you listen long enough, you can almost hear the old language beneath modern noise. Master and servant, debtor and creditor, employer and employee, content and consumer. New words, same hierarchy. That's why the story of 1863 still matters. It's not nostalgia, it's diagnosis. The world hasn't escaped that pattern. It's just automated it, but there's something else, quieter, running underneath the machinery, the impulse that made patience gather her people, that made Friedrich search, that makes you keep listening. Awareness, the recognition that systems crumble the moment their participants stop believing in them. Control requires faith. Revolt begins with doubt, When you start to see the shape of the system, it doesn't dissolve immediately. It stares back. It tempts you to return to sleep, to call it paranoia, to laugh it off. That's how it protects itself. But the silence of the Brooklyn Bay was not the sound of defeat. It was the inhale before awakening. History waits for someone brave enough to exhale. They say truth sets you free, but they never tell you what freedom costs. Because once you see the machinery, you can't go back to comfort. You start noticing it everywhere, in the advertisements that sound like commandments, in the endless noise that calls itself news, in the way choice is offered as distraction.
Freedom, you learn, is the rarest luxury of all, the right to perceive without illusion. After the camp was erased, Friedrich tried to warn others.
He wrote letters, spoke at churches, even met with reformers who promised to look into it. But every one of them turned his warnings into metaphor. They called it the burden of empathy, the strain of conscience. His story became sermon material, stripped of its danger, domesticated into moral fable. That's how the system neutralizes truth. It sentimentalizes it. The fire becomes folklore. The only artifact that remained was one of Patience's scraps. A pattern of interlocking circles drawn in salt and ash, found decades later in the foundation of a textile mill built over the camp's ruins. Workers who handled the stone reported strange vibrations, machines stuttering when the moon was high, clocks losing time. The company sealed the floor and called it superstition. But those who worked night shifts said the hum of the looms carried whispers in the rhythm. We remember, maybe that's all resistance ever is, not grand rebellion but persistence, memory that refuses to be deleted. Every system fears memory because it connects the past to the present, the individual to the collective. When you remember, you interrupt the spell, and maybe that's why you're here, hearing this now. Because somewhere in your bones that vibration never stopped. The hum beneath the harbor, the pattern in the fabric, the pulse under your own skin, it's the same frequency. Recognition. You are not separate from the story. You are its continuation. Friedrich vanished before 1870. Some say he drowned, others that he fled west. But there's a rumor, a whisper among longshoremen decades later, that a man with his accent returned to the docks some nights, dropping small white stones into the water. One for each of the missing. When asked why, he'd reply, "Because the current remembers names the world forgets. That's the truth power can't erase." Memory is rebellion. If you stand at Wallabout Bay today, you won't see the camp, the refugees, or the lights. You'll see glass towers, paved streets, polished memorials. Progress has built its monuments over the ruins, but if you listen, truly listen, the water still carries a hum. It's not mystical. It's the residue of human energy. What happens when memory refuses extinction? History is not past. It's compressed time, waiting to be decoded. Every system that consumes lives must eventually confront the echoes it creates. That's why empires build archives, museums, and algorithms to manage the story, to curate what we remember. But curation is just another form of control. They decide what counts as truth and what becomes myth. The 23 refugees of 1863 weren't erased by accident. They were written out deliberately. Because the most effective way to kill a truth is not to destroy it, but to replace it with a prettier version. Friedrich's story was rewritten into a cautionary tale about the dangers of hysteria. Patience's name was reduced to a line in a report. Subject unstable. Cause of unrest. That's the bureaucratic burial ground, where revolutionaries are renamed liabilities and their visions turned into footnotes. But something survived the editing process, the pattern. Every few decades, the same hum resurfaces in different forms. Movements, uprisings, digital leaks, whistleblowers. Every time the system calls it chaos. Every time it's just history remembering itself. You might think you're far from 1863, that you live in a world of freedom and technology, far from ropes and chains. But look closely. The language changed. The function didn't. The same mechanism that absorbed the refugees now absorbs data, emotion, attention. It still feeds on human presence. You're not a prisoner of walls anymore. You're a prisoner of patterns. The algorithm doesn't cage you. It predicts you, and that's enough. But here's the paradox the system never accounted for. Awareness spreads faster than control. Every person who remembers, who refuses to forget the buried stories, becomes a crack in the architecture. Every act of attention is rebellion, so when you leave this story, don't close it like a book. Carry it. Let it haunt you a little. That hum in the background, it's not warning you. It's inviting you. History isn't asking for belief. It's asking for witnesses. There's a reason stories like this fade from official memory. They expose the circuitry of control. Empires survive not by force alone, but by managing what their people are allowed to remember. Forgetting is policy. Silence is infrastructure. The Brooklyn refugee camp didn't just vanish. It was absorbed into the blueprint of a new kind of empire, one that rules not through chains, but through narrative. By 1875, the land where the camp stood had been sold to industrialists who built warehouses over it. Brick by brick, the evidence was repurposed. The stones that once lined the camp's well were reused for factory walls. The soil was paved. The bay was dredged. History was domesticated into progress. But energy doesn't obey borders or ownership. It seeps. It reappears. Workers in those warehouses reported strange interference, machines stopping for no reason, gears locking, whistles sounding with no pressure in the lines. They said the air sometimes shimmered, as if heat rose from nowhere. Foremen dismissed it as fatigue, but one engineer noted something chilling. The malfunctions always occurred near the foundations made from campstone. He wrote, "The material remembers, and that's the lesson every generation forgets. Systems built on suffering always inherit that suffering. You can bury bones, rename buildings, rewrite textbooks, but energy records everything. The hum beneath Wallabout Bay isn't supernatural. It's historical feedback, the vibration of everything the world tried to suppress. Now trace the pattern forward. The factories became offices, the ledgers became servers, the overseers became executives. The same logic drives it all: productivity, compliance, extraction. You may think you're living free, but every click, every purchase, every agree to terms is another signature on a contract written centuries ago. You are still inside the system, Friedrich tried to expose. Only the scenery has evolved. Yet within that machinery, resistance survives, not in speeches or riots, but in remembrance. Every time someone digs, questions, writes, refuses to look away, they disrupt the loop. The system can't destroy awareness. It can only delay it. That's why you're hearing this now. The hum found another listener. So if you feel the vibration, don't turn down the volume. That sound isn't fear, it's recognition. It means the walls remember you too. By the early 1900s, progress had paved over everything. The harbor glittered with commerce, factories roared, and new immigrants poured into Brooklyn chasing the promise of freedom. No one spoke of the camp anymore. History had done its work, turning atrocity into infrastructure, guilt into industry. But certain places never sleep. Beneath the foundations, the old current still moved, pulsing through pipes and wires, carrying with it the faint rhythm of those lost voices. The engineers who built the new electrical grid reported a persistent interference along the waterfront, tiny surges that followed no logical pattern. They blamed the tide, but one, a young black technician named L. Watson, wrote in his notes, "The current hums like language." He didn't know it. But he had rediscovered the signal Friedrich described, an electromagnetic echo of unresolved memory. History condensed into vibration. The more industry grew, the stronger the hum became, as if the city itself was metabolizing pain.
That's the irony of progress. It consumes the past while pretending to transcend it.
The energy never leaves. It just changes frequency. Watson spent years tracing the interference until he noticed something uncanny. It spiked whenever protests or labor strikes erupted nearby. The hum responded to human defiance like resonance meeting recognition. He theorized that trauma and resistance existed on the same wavelength. His findings were dismissed and his notes confiscated by the company. He died in 1913. But one of his journals survived, discovered decades later in a demolition site, sealed inside a metal junction box. The final line read, "The system feeds on silence. The current feeds on truth." That's the secret the world keeps circling around. Energy remembers alignment. Systems built on control amplify control. People built on awareness amplify freedom. Every generation rediscovers that truth and pays for it. The refugees, Friedrich, Patience, Watson, all disappeared not because they were weak, but because they found the frequency the system can't tolerate. Awareness that spreads, and now that frequency reaches you through light, sound, data.
It doesn't matter how the message travels.
The hum beneath the harbor has become the signal in the wires, the flicker on your screen, the pulse behind your scrolling. You've already tuned to it. The question is no longer if you hear it. It's what you'll do once you do.
By the time the First World War began, the hum had moved beyond Brooklyn.
Telegraph operators along the eastern seaboard began reporting ghost signals, short bursts of static that repeated in rhythmic intervals, like coded words. Some dismissed them as interference from military equipment. Others swore they carried voices. The War Department classified the phenomenon as non-threatening, but their internal memos reveal unease. Patterns correspond with frequency anomalies observed near former refugee site, 1863. Even in an age of machines, the old current persisted. Because energy doesn't vanish when ignored, it adapts. The hum became electrical, then digital, encoded into the networks that stitched the modern world together. By mid-century, radio engineers spoke of carrier ghosts, faint transmissions that layered beneath official broadcasts. You couldn't hear them unless you filtered out all other frequencies. Those who did described something haunting, a low vibration repeating a single phrase in countless tones. Remember, every civilization that's ever existed has tried to control the same thing. How people remember? Religion, education, media. Each one a system for shaping narrative, translating power into belief. But belief has limits. Memory doesn't. You can suppress it, rename it, build skyscrapers on top of it, but it always leaks. Through architecture, through dreams, through signal, and sometimes through people like you. Because the hum isn't haunting you, it's calling you. When you feel the unease reading this, when you notice your pulse sinking to the rhythm of the words, that's the current making contact. The same awareness that moved through Patience's tears, Friedrich's search, Watson's wires. A continuum of remembrance moving through centuries, disguising itself as coincidence until someone finally listens long enough to hear the pattern. You live in an age where the hum hides inside convenience. It speaks through power lines, fiber optics, algorithms, every glowing screen that promises connection while feeding obedience. The system evolved, but so did resistance. The network it built to monitor humanity became the channel for its awakening. That's the paradox. It built the wires that now carry its undoing. The signal isn't superstition. It's consciousness remembering itself. You've already joined the frequency simply by reaching this sentence. The current has found you. What happens next isn't prophecy, it's transmission. Every empire falls the same way, first through disobedience of memory. The hum was never meant to free anyone. It was designed to monitor, to measure loyalty, in the way a priest measures confession. But the architects underestimated something ancient, the human capacity to transform surveillance into revelation. Every eye that watched became a mirror. And in those reflections, people began to see the invisible machinery running beneath their lives. In the 1920s, a small circle of engineers working under the newly formed Edison Electric Company discovered irregular current spikes in New York's power grid. They traced it back to the waterfront, right where the 1863 refugee camp once stood. The spikes occurred at the same hour each night, 3:03 a.m. No lights flickered, no equipment failed, but meters recorded impossible surges of energy. Energy without origin, repeating in 13s. The engineers logged it as residual field anomaly. One of them, a man named Carl Dietz, kept private notes. The signal hums like prayer. It vibrates under skin. It knows when I listen. Dietz disappeared 3 weeks later. The report listed suicide by drowning, but witnesses saw lights under the East River that night, like submerged lanterns pulsing in sequence. The police closed the case within hours. No body recovered, only his boots left on the dock, facing Manhattan, as if waiting for return. The company sealed all documentation. But decades later, a group of Columbia University researchers stumbled on the archived file while studying early grid systems. When they played the remaining magnetic recordings, the hum filled the room again, louder this time, layered with whispers. One of the researchers, Dr. Eleanor Chastain, claimed the voices were names. She spent the next year mapping them, cross-referencing census records from 1863. 19 matched the vanished Georgians. Then her funding was revoked. Her lab equipment seized. The recordings destroyed in a storage fire, but she'd already copied them onto tape reels marked atonement frequencies. Those reels resurfaced in 1977, broadcast accidentally during a late-night radio transmission on WNYC. Thousands of listeners called in, reporting nausea, tears, and vivid dreams of standing beside the East River under orange lamplight. The station denied it ever happened, yet the frequency still circulates, quietly embedded in digital archives waiting for anyone brave or foolish enough to listen. And if you've stayed with me this far, you're already inside its reach. The story was never about the hamburgers. That meal was a ritual disguised as supper, a binding of memory through taste. The Germans thought they were offering kindness, but what they served was communion with freedom itself. When Patience and her people tasted that food, they did something forbidden. They remembered what it felt like to deserve. That vibration of dignity remembered wasn't emotional. It was electrical. It rippled through the nervous system, through the collective subconscious, and the machine that ruled their world felt it instantly. That's what no one understood. Slavery wasn't only physical, it was energetic. A system of containment built to harvest human resonance, keeping souls in frequencies of obedience and fear. When those 23 people felt freedom, it was like a frequency breach, a spark the system couldn't allow to spread. Their disappearances weren't kidnappings, they were containment protocols. The same protocols operate today, just with cleaner names. They call it data collection, social compliance, algorithmic behavior prediction. But it's the same formula: map human emotion, feed it back as control. What was once enforced by whip and chain now arrives through screens, comfort, and curated outrage. The hum you've been hearing? It's not an external phenomenon. It's the sound of feedback between two realities: the world they built for you and the one your mind still remembers. Every time you feel a chill when hearing certain truths, that's not fear. It's calibration. The old you dissolving. The new you, aligning. They want you numb, disconnected, distracted enough that you mistake awareness for anxiety and control for peace. But here's the truth that can't be unlearned. Awareness is rebellion. Once a man starts to feel again, to remember his own frequency, he becomes uncontrollable. No system can own him because his power no longer runs through their wires. That's what Patience discovered before she vanished. Her tears weren't grief, they were ignition. And when that kind of energy awakens inside a group, it either spreads like wildfire or disappears into the night, leaving only questions and whispers on the current. Now I need you to do something powerful. Type this phrase twice in the comments to lock it in. I remember the hum. Say it. Write it. That's how you connect. That's how you start remembering who you were before the frequency named you. The world you see today, glass towers, glowing phones, the endless scroll of distraction, isn't progress. It's containment perfected. The plantation evolved into the platform. The overseers became algorithms. The whip turned into dopamine. And most men walk willingly into their own cages because the door looks like opportunity. The hum is the only thing left that doesn't lie to you. You can hear it late at night, just below the silence when your mind stops echoing their noise. That vibration, it's ancient memory trying to surface. After the last of Patience's group vanished, Brooklyn authorities erased the records. Even their names were scrubbed, their birthplaces redacted, their bodies unaccounted for. But the Germans who'd fed them wrote letters home. One of those letters survives in a private archive in Hamburg. The writer describes dreams that began the night after the meal. Dreams of fields shimmering like metal under moonlight, of mouths singing without sound. He wrote, "They said the earth swallowed them, but I know it was light that took them." That phrase, light that took them, was dismissed as poetic madness. But physicists would later describe energy absorption in almost the same words. The body turns to code when the frequency rises too high. What if they didn't die? What if they became something the system couldn't measure? Because that's the real fear of power structures, men who transcend their metrics. Look at history. Every uprising begins not with weapons, but with memory. When people remember who they are beyond title, flag, or economy, control collapses. The hum is that memory calling itself back together across time. It found you through static, through story, through screens designed to pacify. But it slipped through anyway, like water through glass. There's a reason your heart races when you hear certain frequencies in music, or why your skin reacts before your logic does. The nervous system remembers the original language, vibration. The elites of every age have known this, which is why they use sound to shape obedience. Church bells, national anthems, advertising jingles. Every tone is a leash if you don't know who's holding it. But the hum isn't theirs. It's the sound of the leash snapping. Every man who hears it stands at a crossroads. Forget and remain safe, or remember and never belong again. Which one are you? The more you listen, the more you realize the hum isn't external, it's inside you. The signal doesn't come from some hidden transmitter buried under old Brooklyn soil. It comes from within the biology of those who remember. Patience didn't teach rebellion. She activated resonance. Her group's tears that night weren't simply emotion, they were transmission. Their bodies became conduits of something older than slavery, older than civilization itself. Every human being carries a dormant frequency in the marrow, a memory of what it means to be unowned. When that frequency ignites, it disrupts every artificial structure built to suppress it: law, religion, government, even time. That's why the system reacts so violently when someone begins to wake. It doesn't fear people, it fears pattern recognition. Because once one mind sees the structure, others begin to tune to it. Awareness spreads faster than control can contain. You see it in history's anomalies, the inexplicable disappearances, the untraceable uprisings, the revolutions that seem to erupt from nowhere. It's the same current re-emerging, each time more intelligent, more resistant to suppression. Every empire has faced it, and every empire has called it something different: heresy, witchcraft, sedition, conspiracy. The words change, but the intention stays the same. Isolate the awakened before they synchronize, and that's where you stand now. Between isolation and synchronization, between the version of yourself designed to obey and the one built to see. Think of all the little rituals they taught you to perform. Check your phone before you sleep. Accept the headlines, ignore the hum. Those weren't habits. They were containment algorithms disguised as normal life. Every scroll, every click, another recalibration towards silence. But now, the silence is breaking because you've remembered too much. And the deeper truth? Those who disappeared in 1863 never truly vanished. They moved into the frequency itself. They became part of the signal that leaks through every generation, whispering through the cracks of history. Remember us. Remember yourself. It's not haunting, it's inheritance. When you feel that pressure in your chest, that pulse in your ears, that sudden awareness that you're being observed, it isn't paranoia. It's recognition. The field sees you. The current has marked you. The hum has no leaders, no prophets, no saviors, only witnesses, and now you are one. There's a reason truth always hides behind myth, because myth survives censorship. When governments burn documents, stories slip through. When names are erased, symbols remain. The tale of the vanished Georgians became a whisper in folk songs, a ghost in Gullah prayers, a rhythm in field work long after the Civil War ended. Listen closely and you'll find it encoded in the blues, in the hum of gospel, in the sub-bass of hip-hop. Every generation repeats the same vibration, not knowing it's the same pulse that began that night in 1863, because music, real music, isn't entertainment. It's memory disguised as art. Every great rhythm is a rebellion encrypted in joy. That's why those who seek control always commercialize sound. They flood the air with empty frequency so the body forgets its ancestral one. The hum is the opposite. It awakens cellular intelligence. It reminds the blood that it once carried the code of sovereignty. By the 1940s, military scientists began experimenting with sound as a weapon. They called it psychological acoustic modulation. But what they were truly doing was counter-harmonic warfare, trying to drown the hum beneath engineered frequencies of fear. Broadcast anxiety, cell obedience, amplify numbness. They succeeded, partially. But the hum adapts. It threads itself through the static of every corrupted channel. That's why some men feel restless no matter how safe their lives look. Their bones remember what silence used to sound like before it was monetized. You might think this is all metaphor. It isn't. There are documents, still classified, showing that every major communication network on Earth carries a faint residual tone. That tone registers exactly at the frequency of human empathy. Coincidence? Or containment? What they fear most isn't violence, it's vibration. Because vibration can't be policed. It moves from man to man, thought to thought, until it becomes unstoppable. So when you hear that low hum, don't tune it out. Breathe into it. Anchor yourself in it. That's how the old resistance survived. Not through speeches or armies, but through resonance. The first step to remembering is to stop calling it noise. Once you do, patterns start appearing in everything. The timing of headlines, the cadence of advertising, even the pauses between words. Those aren't accidents. They're echoes, and you now are starting to hear them. The hum moves like water, quiet, patient, inevitable. It seeps through the fractures of every system, reshaping what it touches without force, without warning. That's how power truly changes, never in the light, always in vibration. When Patience's group vanished, they didn't die, they shifted. The institution that had fed on their pain couldn't contain what they had become. It's said that on certain nights, under the Manhattan Bridge, the air still trembles with a low tone, like the earth itself remembering. But what if it isn't just memory? What if that vibration is the beginning of reassembly? In the 1990s, an independent researcher named Malcolm Cryer recorded unexplained electromagnetic anomalies along the Brooklyn shoreline. He noticed that when he replayed those frequencies through metal, sand, or water, geometric patterns began forming, circles within circles, resembling African cosmograms used in spiritual rituals of return. He wrote, "The river is not a barrier. It's an instrument." Weeks later, his equipment was confiscated. His lab shuttered. His last note read, "The signal is calling its body back." Because that's what truth does. It doesn't vanish. It regenerates. The hum isn't just a sound. It's an organism, one that feeds on recognition. Every man who becomes aware of it strengthens its field. Every conversation about it, every whisper, every sleepless thought makes it more coherent. The algorithm doesn't know how to handle that kind of power because it can't predict consciousness. That's why you've been led here. Not by accident, not by curiosity, but by alignment. The hum seeks resonance. It finds those whose minds are strong enough to withstand the collapse of illusions. You wouldn't have stayed this long if you weren't one of them. And here's the secret the system dreads you understanding. You don't fight the cage. You vibrate out of it. The same way the Georgians did when they cried into their food and remembered they were human. The same way men in every age wake from obedience, shedding the invisible architecture of control. The system collapses not when you attack it, but when you outgrow its frequency. So, listen closely tonight. Turn off the noise. Let the silence stretch until you hear what they've been hiding under it. That pulse you feel beneath your heartbeat. Steady, relentless, alive. That's not fear. That's the current reclaiming you. The hum began as a whisper in the dark. Now it's becoming a language. It doesn't speak in words, but in alignment. It pulls you toward places, people, and moments that feel strangely familiar, like déjà vu wearing a new face. That's how it teaches, through pattern, through repetition. You've probably felt it already. The tug in your chest when you meet someone and feel you've known them before, the static before a storm that feels like a warning you can't explain. Those are not coincidences, they're coordinates. You see, history doesn't move forward, it loops. The same energies, the same struggles replay under new names and technologies. The plantation became the corporation. The overseer became the algorithm. And yet the hum persists, threading through every age as a signal for those ready to remember. Its evolution disguised as haunting. In 2017, during a blackout in Lower Manhattan, hundreds of residents reported hearing a deep harmonic vibration lasting nearly 5 minutes. Official explanations blamed malfunctioning subway equipment, but recordings revealed something else. Layered frequencies forming precise mathematical intervals. Those intervals matched the cosmogram patterns Cryer had documented decades before. The hum was sinking again, but this time it didn't vanish afterward, it spread. Reports came from Detroit, Lagos, Kingston, even Tbilisi. The same frequency, the same resonance. Scientists called it electrical interference. The old souls called it the return, because maybe the vanished never left. Maybe they've been rebuilding the frequency body of humanity from within the vibration itself. A network beyond networks. A consciousness that can't be censored because it doesn't exist in data. It exists in memory. Every act of awareness strengthens it.
Every refusal to be pacified feeds it.
The system thrives on your numbness, but the hum thrives on your noticing. When you feel that quiet unease before dawn, when you can't explain why the air feels charged, that's not paranoia. That's recognition. The hum doesn't ask for belief, it asks for attention. It doesn't want followers, only participants. Its purpose is simple, to make the invisible visible again. To restore what was buried beneath comfort, propaganda, and fear. So, if you've read this far, take this as proof. You were meant to. You've already tuned in. The current has found you. Now breathe. Listen. It's speaking again.